Hello, this is Jeff, and in this video I'll be doing a sort of overview of one of the sources that I'll be using for my final paper for the Imperialism class. With that having been said, I do want to just quickly kind of introduce my topic. Obviously we have a longer form video coming on that, but just really quick, my topic will be about the links between genocide and imperialism. More specifically, my topic will be about making the argument that imperialism could often be a strong motivating factor for the commission of genocide, and because of that, it should be looked at as a strong potential precursor to genocide. Basically, I'm making the argument that, whenever you look at an imperialistic war of conquest, that doesn't necessarily guarantee a genocide will be carried out, but it should be looked at as a very, very strong potential precursor to one. Yeah, I'll go a lot more in depth on that and my various other sources, obviously, in the video where we talk about that. But getting into it, the source that I have chosen for today to talk about is Genocide, a Comprehensive Introduction by Mr. Adam Jones. And this book is not necessarily about imperialism specifically. It's more intended as a very broad overview of genocide, what genocide is, the various different definitions that have been proposed for genocide, the different legal definitions that countries and international bodies use, what are some examples of genocide, what are some precursors to genocide, and various other things. I mean, it is a fairly comprehensive overview. Mine is the second edition, and I actually have this book from Professor Lieberman's previous genocide class, which I took, and this book was on the list for that class. And this book actually talks about imperialism and genocide quite a bit. There's an entire chapter on the subject of the imperial era and the potential commission of genocide during that era, and how the commission of genocide during that era may have inspired later genocides such as the Holocaust. And obviously that's going to be very useful for my paper. The book was published in 2010. I believe there has been a third edition, so this book has been updated since then, but this is the version I have, so this is the one I am using for now. Like I said, I selected this book for a couple of reasons. One being I had read it before, I had used it before in Professor Lieberman's other class, and I knew there was an extensive section on imperialism and genocide, but also because this book will give me the sort of background that I need to establish my argument in the paper, because in order to establish my argument that imperialism should be examined as a potential precursor for genocide, I obviously need to have some sort of sense of what genocide is, what is the definition that I'm using, are there other definitions that might, go against my thesis? So I need to have that sort of background knowledge on the different definitions of genocide, what constitutes genocide, what doesn't, and there's disagreement about that, right? And so I need to have that sort of background in the topic before I can make the argument that, well, imperialism and genocide could be inherently linked. I can't make that argument if I don't have a very clear sense of what genocide is, what are some historical examples, how can I use those examples to back up my argument, and this book is going to provide the sort of foundation for that, which I will be using in my paper quite a bit. The book section on imperialism specifically does talk quite a bit about various topics that we've discussed in this class, and one of the biggest ones that it talks about is the events in Namibia, and the genocide that was carried out by the Germans there against the Herero people. And this is going to be a key case study for my paper. I am going to be using the Herero example extensively in my paper. Obviously, it won't be the only example, but it's an important one, and there's a couple reasons for that. In this book, actually, Jones refers to the genocide of the Herero as the first genocide of the 20th century. That's a direct quote from this book. And he argues extensively in the chapter on imperialism in this book that the genocide in Namibia during this time period is a direct influence on the later perpetuation of the Holocaust. And I think the Holocaust is kind of the, I feel weird saying this, but the classic example of genocide, I guess, it's the example that everyone, I think that's where their mind kind of immediately goes, right, is to the Holocaust. And he sort of makes the argument here that what happened to the Herero is a precursor of sorts to the genocide in Europe in the 1940s of the Jews and various other ethnic groups that were persecuted by the Nazis. And, that was something that had actually struck me when we were doing our readings a little bit earlier in this course, and is a major reason why I chose this topic, is that, he goes into detail in this book about how the Herero were rounded up into camps, and some of these camps had as high as a 90% death rate. And when you read something like that, I mean, it immediately calls to mind the Holocaust, right? Obviously we're not talking about gas chambers here necessarily, but we are talking about encampments in which people are imprisoned and systematically murdered on a pretty shocking scale, I think. And, I had always kind of been under the impression prior to this class that the events that took place in the Holocaust were kind of unique, not in the sense that they were a genocide. Genocide has been around for, unfortunately, all of human history probably, but just in the sheer scale, in the use of these wide-scale camps to imprison these people and then mass murder them. I was always sort of under the impression that that was kind of a unique event in history and that there wasn't necessarily anything kind of comparable to that before. And I mean, this book and the various other sources that we have about the Herero genocide pretty strongly contradict that, right? You can see something that is a direct prequel to the Holocaust, unfortunately. And so that is going to be a major part of my paper. I am going to be talking about that extensively. And, this book has a big section on that I am going to be citing quite a bit, I would imagine, as part of that. But he also goes into, various other sort of atrocities that were carried out by different imperial powers, the Dutch, the British, the French, all these other sort of countries. And many of them committed atrocities that today, depending on the definition again, but today we would look back at and say, that seems fairly genocidal in terms of scale, in terms of the activities that were being carried out, in terms of the way people were being slaughtered or the way their culture was being attacked. I think under a lot of definitions of genocide, we would look back at some of those events and there is a strong argument to be made that you are looking at genocide. And, this book really goes into depth on that. And so that chapter is going to be crucial. But the whole book is going to be crucial because, like I said, I need this book to sort of give me that very strong educational background and scholarly information on genocide, how genocide is being looked at by current historians, how has it been looked at by past historians, and why should we take seriously the idea that one country engaging in imperialism could be at risk of committing genocide against another country or the inhabitants of another country. Why would that be? This book is really going to provide me a lot of that intellectual backdrop, which I'm going to use. And I just want to say I think it's still... I think it's still an issue today, reading through this book and looking at the examples of genocide and looking at the examples of the imperial powers. I actually think we see something fairly similar in the Russo-Ukrainian war going on right now. I've seen several news articles and sources refer to that war as genocidal. And if you look at the mass slaughter of civilians there, the mass sexual assault of women that's been going on, large thousands of children being kidnapped out of Ukraine and taken to Russia, and no one's quite sure where they're going or what's being done with them. Some of that stuff is very reminiscent of the activities that we see being carried out by the imperial powers during this time period. And so I think it's very much still a topic, even though the imperial era is sort of over and we're talking about a period of history. These sort of events still echo throughout history and are still impacting us to this day. And that's why, one of the reasons why I chose this book is the fact that it's going to give me the information I need to concretely make my argument that when you look at an imperialistic war of conquest, which is what the Russo-Ukrainian war is, when you're looking at something like that, the motivations to remove people that are in the way of you acquiring your resources is very, very high. And when you start talking like that and thinking like that about, as an imperialistic power, I'm here to take these resources, but there's these people and they're in my way, what am I going to do about that? You're thinking along genocidal lines, I think, at that point. Whether you carry out a genocide or not, the thought process behind that is inherently genocidal, I think, and I'm going to make that argument in my paper. And I think this book will be very much crucial for me in terms of that sort of scholarly knowledge and background and understanding of genocide and how it relates to imperialism. So, yeah, that's about it. I'll go more in depth on the overview of my paper and sort of some of my other sources maybe in the other video, but that's pretty much it for now. I'm looking forward to making my argument using some of the information that I've learned about from this book. And yeah, thank you for listening.